Charlie Chaplin was one of the world's greatest filmmakers, and he was also blacklisted from Hollywood and exiled from the United States. Turns out, the real life of this slapstick legend wasn't very funny at all. By the end of the 19th century, Charles Chaplin Sr. was one of the hottest talents on the British stage. A comic singer, Chaplin Sr.'s star was rising even as he was settling down with his wife and fellow vaudeville star Hannah Chaplin. In 1889, the pair welcomed a child who they named Charlie Chaplin Jr. The young Charlie's life was anything but easy, however. When he was just one, his father walked out on the family, taking their means of support with him. Hannah and Charlie were plunged into grinding poverty, which Chaplin Sr. did nothing to alleviate. At the height of his fame, Chaplin Sr. was arrested for failing to provide for both Charlie and his other son, Sidney. Drinking was also a serious problem among vaudeville stars in the 1890s, and Charles Chaplin was a booze hound like no other. By the time Charlie was 12, his father was dead, killed by his addiction to the bottle. Despite their destitution, Hannah managed to keep a roof over her son's head, even entertaining him by performing old vaudeville routines. It could have even been a poor but happy childhood. Sadly, fate had other ideas. Always fascinated by his mother's vaudeville career, Chaplin was mimicking her routines by the age of 5, and although he would soon take to the stage himself, the circumstances were anything but happy. Charlie's first performance took place during one of Hannah Chaplin's shows. He was watching from the wings when halfway through a song his mother lost her voice. The stage manager panicked and shoved Charlie out. He then proceeded to stun the audience with his own routine. In a kinder world, this moment might have marked the beginning of better times for the Chaplins. Instead, it was the beginning of their nightmare. It quickly became clear that Hannah's vocal issue was merely the first outward sign of her rapidly declining mental health. As she and the children continued on in poverty, Hannah drifted further from reality. Eventually, she was institutionalized, and Charlie and his brother were thrown into a workhouse. Charles Chaplin Sr. was still alive at the time and briefly agreed to take the boys in, but it didn't last. Charlie wound up spending so much of his childhood in the workhouse that he only ever received 6 months' worth of schooling. For the first 12 years of Charlie Chaplin's life, Charles Chaplin Sr. seems to have had fleeting pangs of conscience in which he tried to help out his son, even if those pangs quickly dissipated. One such moment came in 1897 when he got his son into a clog dancing troupe to make ends meet. Even this is uncertain, however, and other sources claim that Hannah Chaplin's sympathetic showbiz contacts arranged the gig. Sadly, this wasn't to be Charlie's big break. The so-called 8 Lancashire lads went nowhere, and Charlie was forced to scramble for work to survive, which meant taking on an endless parade of day-to-day jobs. Charlie would later claim he had been a newspaper vendor, a toy maker, a printer, a doctor's boy, and much more. It wasn't until the 20th century that he was able to move back into vaudeville, and it wasn't until 1908 that this became a viable career. Signed to play the drunk in a comic sketch for Fred Carno's pantomime troupe, Chaplin eventually toured America. Evidently, America liked what it saw. In 1912, producer Max Sennett signed the young comic to appear in motion pictures. This time, Chaplin's big break was real. Stanley Kubrick's name may be the byword for artistic perfectionism to the point of insanity, but before Kubrick, there was Charlie Chaplin. After Max Sennett signed Chaplin, the young comic star exploded. He made 35 films in 1914 alone, and by the second film, he'd created his famous tramp character. By the 11th, he was directing. By 1915, he'd signed to S&A Studios and was given his own production unit, and by 1916, Chaplin was with Mutual Films, where he had complete creative freedom and the largest salary in Hollywood. So it's fair to say that things were going well for Chaplin, and they would continue to do so for the next few years. But this was also the period in which Chaplin the autocrat emerged. It would be the world's first real glimpse of the tortured and driven man behind the genius. Known as the most demanding man in Hollywood, he would reshoot scenes hundreds of times, and rather than actually directing, he'd act out everyone's role for them to show them how it should be done.
I know this, that I'm very uneasy if other people do it for me.
Chaplin would also fire actors halfway through a film's production and start their work all over again. It was a bizarre and domineering system, but somehow it actually worked. But these traits also hinted at a much darker figure in Chaplin, one who was about to emerge. By 1918, Charlie Chaplin was making some of his finest and most popular pictures. Off camera, however, Chaplin was anything but the lovable miscreant he appeared to be. Mildred Harris was barely 16 when Chaplin met her. She was an emerging starlet at best, and Chaplin was the biggest star in the world. He seduced her, and when he thought he'd gotten her pregnant, he arranged a hasty marriage. When he found out the pregnancy wasn't real, he got her pregnant for real, and then divorced her soon after. Chaplin's next relationship was even more disturbing. The actor first met Lita Grey in 1920 when she was a 12-year-old child star. Chaplin spent the next few years doting on Gray, keeping her in his orbit until she was a teenager. He seduced her when she was just 15 or 16, depending on who you ask. Either way, Chaplin got her pregnant, married her, impregnated her again, and then abandoned her in 1927. There were other scandals in Chaplin's love life, too. The 1924 shooting death of producer Thomas Ince on William Randolph Hearst's yacht was rumored to have occurred after Hearst tried to kill Chaplin for seducing his wife. In the heat of the moment, he allegedly shot the wrong man. In a taste of things to come, these many seductions and salacious rumors would later see Chaplin banned from several U.S. states. During the Great Depression, Charlie Chaplin's career reached its peak. For weary audiences, the tramp was just the tonic they needed. His movies really did fulfill that old cliché of bringing joy to millions, even as other silent stars like Harold Lloyd and Buster Keaton were fading away. By the outbreak of World War II, Chaplin wasn't just famous, he was an icon. He also considered himself more or less untouchable, which may explain what happened next. As the war got underway, Chaplin began making public speeches extolling the virtues of the Soviet Union. In 1942, he even praised Joseph Stalin's purges and said, "The only people who object to communism are Nazi agents." With the establishment already against him over his private life, Chaplin's perceived anti-American beliefs handed his enemies the mother of all sticks to beat him with.
The communist fifth columnists among us are working for a world dictatorship. To accomplish this, their strategy is to undermine the confidence of our people.
Ushered into law in 1910 by Representative James R. Mann, the Mann Act's official name is the White Slave Traffic Act, and its original intention was to combat forced prostitution. However, the act was worded so broadly that it could be used to prosecute almost any consensual sex act, provided one participant traveled to meet the other. In 1944, Charlie Chaplin's personal life again exploded in a mess of seedy allegations, this time for supposedly impregnating and dumping actress Joan Barry. Previously, this kind of thing would have stayed in the tabloids, but emboldened by rising anti-communist feeling in America, the establishment pounced. Chaplin was arrested for immoral purposes under the Mann Act, having allegedly taken Barry across state lines before seducing her. He was eventually acquitted, but the establishment was gunning for his blood. Chaplin was sued by Barry for paternity payments. Despite medical tests that proved he wasn't the father, Barry won the case, and Chaplin was forced to pay out for a child that had been scientifically proven to belong to someone else. What remained of his reputation in America was shredded in the process, and things were about to get even worse. In 1947, Charlie Chaplin's reputation had hit a low point. Nevertheless, Europe had been shattered by war, America was devouring itself in a Red Scare, and all audiences wanted was for the little tramp to make them laugh again. Instead, Chaplin chose to make Monsieur Verdoux, an Orson Welles scripted black comedy in which Chaplin plays a serial killer preying on rich old ladies. It did not go over well. Monsieur Verdoux bombed hard. It nearly ruined United Artists, and the press junket for the film turned into a kangaroo court in which Chaplin was mobbed by the press. The tabloids had announced in advance that they would make him squirm for his communist leanings, and they really did stick to their word. Chaplin almost had to abandon one press conference when all the reporters did was accuse him of not being sufficiently supportive of capitalism. It didn't help that Monsieur Verdoux could clearly be read as a black satire on capitalism's worst excesses. At the exact same time Monsieur Verdoux was ruining his career, Chaplin was put on notice by the House of Un-American Activities Committee that he could soon be indicted. While he never was, the little tramp still became a favorite punching bag of anti-communist senators, men who were desperate to have Chaplin removed from the picture at basically any cost. Just a few years later, in 1952, they finally found their excuse. Although never formally indicted by the HUAC, Charlie Chaplin was still blacklisted in Hollywood. Blacklisting ruined guys like Dalton Trumbo, but Chaplin was somewhat immune since he was rich enough to finance his own films. This may be why, after the disaster of Monsieur Verdoux subsided, he was back in the director's chair for Limelight, until he was kicked out of America, that is. Although he'd been living in America for 40 years, by 1952, Chaplin still hadn't applied for U.S. citizenship. He was still using his British passport, which didn't endear him one bit to the American elite. In the fall of that year, Chaplin decided to combine an international press junket for Limelight with a trip to Britain. He planned to be in Europe for about 4 weeks, but wound up living there for 25 years. On September 19th, U.S. immigration barred Chaplin from re-entry, and for the rest of his life, Chaplin remained a man in exile. The last decades of Charlie Chaplin's life were marked by ups and downs. On the one hand, he only made 2 more films, A King in New York and A Countess from Hong Kong. On the other hand, he settled in Switzerland with his wife, Una O'Neill, and raised a remarkably happy family by his son's account. Perhaps unsurprisingly, O'Neill had been another of Chaplin's young conquests. Married when she was 18 and he was 54, they nonetheless stayed together until Charlie died in 1977. Sadly, fate had one last gruesome curveball to throw at Chaplin. Months after his funeral, 2 grave robbers dug up his body and made off with it. They held the tramp's remains for a couple of months, demanding a ransom payment of $600,000. O'Neill refused to play ball, however, hanging up on the criminals rather than hear their demands. Panicked, the grave robbers began to make mistakes, and the Swiss police eventually tracked them down. After a tortured life and a truly bizarre postscript, Chaplin was finally laid to rest, this time for good. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite historical figures are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.